Hello and good morning, evening or afternoon, depending on when you are watching this latest SustyTalk from Edie. SustyTalks are our ongoing series of video interviews with the experts, which we launched during the first lockdown here in the UK and which we have kept going ever since. So we're more than 2 years in now. And for Fashion Revolution Week, I'm delighted to have Andrew Martin from the Sustainable Apparel Coalition on the line with me. Andrew heads up the coalition's work on membership and stakeholder engagement. So thank you so much, Andrew, for taking the time this morning. How are you doing and whereabouts are you dialing in from?
Oh, thank you very much, Sarah. So very luckily, I'm dialing in from Cornwall. One of the benefits of COVID was relocating, setting up a new job and being able to do it from Cornwall. So yeah, feel very lucky.
Yeah, very jealous of you right now. So it would be great to begin with, for those that might not be familiar with the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, a bit of an introduction to the organisation and what it does and what your role there entails.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you very much for the opportunity. So the Sustainable Apparel Coalition has quite a fascinating sort of origin story. It began in 2009 when Patagonia and Walmart, that you would consider two pretty much unlikely bedfellows, got together, and some people from the organizations decided that to address particularly at that point, the environmental issues facing the industry, they felt that they needed an aligned approach, particularly to measuring, to developing a measuring standardized framework and approach for sustainability performance, initially environmental and then including social. And so they kind of set out a theory of change, which was let's align on an industry framework for measuring and communicating sustainability performance. After that, the organization then grew. We're currently around 280 members, representing around 40% of the global apparel and fashion industry. Just to give one more piece, I guess, that was 2009. The last 10 years have really seen the organization spend their time developing a series of tools to address those very issues for measuring sustainability performance. And the set of tools covers factories, facilities, suppliers, covers products, and covers the brands and retailers themselves. So that's really been the work of the last 10 years. I think one of the special and unique things of the organization is its approach to really incorporating the whole of the value chain in that process. So right from the beginning, it was brands, retailers, plus manufacturers, and also representatives from, the broader non-profit community, academia, industry associations, NGOs. And collectively, it is that group that has developed this suite of tools. And I keep coming back, really a suite of tools to standardize approach to measuring performance in sustainability and supply chains. So that's a quick background. Does that help?
Yes, definitely. And how long have you been with the coalition?
So I've been with the coalition coming up for 2 years in June. My background, if it's interesting, I have a 20-something year experience in the global textile supply chain in raw material manufacturing. And I've spent most of the last 15 years in the sustainability field, both working in the industry for similar associations in this space, non-profit associations, with a little bit of a jump out into doing some interesting work with the Gross National Happiness Centre in Bhutan and academia. But that's a little side foray that I had.
Great. Well, I feel like that would be a separate talk
Would
in and
love
of
to talk about it
itself.
sometime, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to stick with measuring, disclosing, communicating. And I've been in this field for 4 years now. And yeah, things have been changing very quickly in regards to that. And even this year, we've seen a lot more about disclosures and about eco-labelings and things like that, and about obviously the importance of standardized data collection and disclosures so that investors can meet their goals and so that ultimately global goals on things like climate and human rights can be attained. So I wanted to get your thoughts on some of the recent developments in this space. So something that we've been following closely is the Green Claims Code from the UK Competition and Markets Authority. So the code came out, I believe, last year. And the authority has now provided more information on how it's going to apply that to the fashion sector. So I wanted to get your thoughts on what the implications of that are for the companies that you work with.
Sure. I think the first thing that's important to say is I actually think it's a really positive step. I think, and it's not just, I mean, we've got the UK and the CMA, you've got the work that's happening in the EU. Last week there was the updated textile strategy and their empowering consumers piece of work. So I think it's much broad. It's a broader thing that's happening across the industry. For us, I actually see it almost as just at the right time, maybe a little bit late, because I think we need to be moving much faster on some of these things. And if I was to go back to how the Sustainable Apparel Coalition spent 10 years developing tools to collect in a systemized, standardized way, I think we've been doing that for 10 years. The next big step is really, how is all that data and information going to be used, and how can we put it in the hands of key decision makers? And whether that's, you mentioned the financial community or policymakers or even consumers. And I think that data and that information needs to be in the hands of people to make better, more informed decisions. So I think things like the CMA, we welcome. I think some of the framework that they're looking at, we absolutely agree. You know, I think you have to be telling the whole story. I think comparing, you know, apples to apples. And I think that's one of the things that's been a criticism in the past. And I think it's critical that we are doing that. Also ensuring, for me, I think that when people are making claims, that they do it in a standardized, common approach. So that's why I say in some ways I use the phrase cautiously. It's almost like a godsend, because I think it's what we've been working towards, is actually having this standardized methodology and approach that now, you know, if the authorities and policy and legislation, which I think is important to drive us forward, I actually think it's going to help the SAC for 10 years has been working with our members to develop these tools. We've been empowering them to make decisions, to do what they can. Ultimately, it's still in the hands of the members to do the work and actually make those changes. And I see good, smart regulation, both in the consumer space, but also in terms of the full disclosure space, being something that will just accelerate the work that we've been trying to do, and adds another dimension and another level that I think will just move us forward as we need to.
Of course, I'm interested to see how it goes. And obviously it's only part of the solution, being that obviously it's a code and they have to call in everyone and say, oh, you say your garment's carbon neutral, but what does that actually mean?
Completely.
And then look at the lengthy, potentially explanations for that.
Can I say on that, Sarah? I think that's a really important point, because I think where somebody like the Sustainable Apparel Coalition and some of our partners have an important role is to be clear that what we're trying to do at the consumer facing space is doing something that's trying to make something understandable and meaningful to consumers on topics that are incredibly complex and incredibly detailed. And I think one of the things I think we have a very strong role in doing is trying to make sure we help support doing that, making sure it sticks to credible, scientific-based approaches and data. Because I think sometimes there are simplistic approaches to presenting messages to consumers, and I think that's where one of the biggest challenges is going to be. But I think that's where we have an important role to play.
Of course, and I wanted to talk about how we can simplify this information sometimes, because some people want to dive deep into the data, but a lot of other people will just be looking at the labels in passing. So I wanted to talk about eco labels, which is something we've been seeing a lot. I've noticed it most probably in food and in beauty sectors, where people are understandably concerned about sustainability, because these are things that they're putting on and in their bodies, so they want them to be good quality and to be sustainable. So I wanted to get your views on whether you think fashion might be next, and how we get a good eco label, really, because as we've said, the information needs to be understandable and meaningful. It needs to be comparable, so you can't have a mismatch of different standards. So how could we go about this?
So I think for me, one of the important things around that is to ensure, again, and it's I may keep repeating myself, I think coming back to having something that is aligned, comparable and standardized is going to be critical behind that. Because I think what we have seen when it comes to a lack of regulation on labeling is, people going making claims they want on data they want. Whereas actually, I think what we do need for the industry is an aligned approach, and I think we need an aligned methodology that can then support that those claims that are being made. I mean, we've done a lot of work as the SAC in facilitating the work in the product environmental footprint category rules in the European Union, which has been, for me, a really interesting and important piece of work, because it's brought together a group of across the industry that has actually brought in the expertise. It's been led by, well, we've been facilitating it, but the EU DG Environment also sits there and has a veto. So it's an industry approach to developing category rules for product environmental footprinting. Those kind of approaches that are then implemented from a policy perspective will be key to whatever we do with eco-labeling. And I think where we're at the moment as well is a sort of a juncture where we're getting more and more indication on legislation and regulation around voluntary approaches, which is kind of, if you are going to say something, then you need to follow these rules. I think the next step we're going to be needing to look at is what are the requirements for mandatory labeling? So actually moving it beyond just the, if you want to make a claim, let's have a standardized approach and do it, to you need to be making, you need to be putting out more information. And I think that's the next phase of the journey from the regulation perspective, and something we're really looking at deeply, and how we can support that. So yeah, and to come back to what would sit on the label, as I say, standardized approaches. I think there are certain important things, like for us, credible data, scientifically based, but also accessible. I think that's going to be a really important piece of this, is that if you're going to put information on a label, I think that data that you're using to make the claim has to be accessible, and not just supported with credible data, but accessible for people to get at and to see. And that's something we've done. We did the first launch of our transparency program last year with the Higg Index sustainability profiles. And so if you see that on a website of one of our members, or you will actually be able to click through to the data behind it and supporting it. Now, that's on materials. We're working on taking that further into other areas for facilities, brand and retail practices as well. But I think having accessibility to the data is going to be critical.
Great, thank you for that overview. And I wanted to come into some of those points that you've mentioned, because obviously standardization, as we've seen, doesn't happen overnight. No. Takes action from all parts of the system, and also improving the quality of data and making sure that it's up to date and that it does have that scientific credibility is also not an overnight endeavour. And looking into the history of the coalition, if you give it a quick Google, you'll see a number of criticisms of the Higg Index. Mainly, I noticed between 2016 and 2020. Some changes were then made between 2020 and now to allay some of that. But there was another recent report that we covered from the Changing Markets Foundation, again saying, could we be going further on this? How can we make sure that these schemes are really stopping greenwashing and driving action, meeting the scale of the challenge? So I wanted to get your view on how the coalition's responding to those reports and how it's informing work streams going forward.
No, absolutely. And I think you'd expect me to say this. I think reports such as these are important. They have a role to play. I think they keep us true and honest, and I think they also help remind us of, for me, one of the most important things is the urgency. We recognise the industry has issues and needs to improve it, and needs to improve quickly. I think we need to accelerate some of the things going on. So I think there's an important role for such reports to play. I think in terms of what it means for us, I mean, in terms of the reports themselves, we're always open to engage with any organization as they're writing reports to give them better information, because some of the reports over the years that we've seen, have misinformation and don't have the full picture. And I think it's important that we remain open to engage, which we always have done and always will be. And I'd like to see also there a little bit more objectivity and transparency on some of the funding and report writing, because I think it's important to know what we're trying to drive at. However, what's really important for me is some of the messaging. We actually agree with some of the reports. We agree with some of the things coming out that we do need, better, credible data. We need better verification processes. I think it's an interesting one in terms of the recent report that talked about the need for ambition. I think that's absolutely true. And so the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, as part of our new strategy, which was launched in 2020, our vision and mission, had a number of key aspirational objectives. And if I just pick two of them that are really relevant to this, one of which is, we're looking for a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions for our members. And the other is around 100% of our members having credible, trusted data being transparently shared with consumers. And so those two are both pretty ambitious, and we're doing a lot of work behind them. So, like I say, I think at the end, and ultimately, what I would say our response to the reports and criticisms are, we just need to move faster and do more and do it. And maybe I hesitate a little bit because I think we do need to communicate better. I think we need to get people to understand what we're doing better. But for us, the most important thing is to really accelerate the work. If we're going to get to a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, we need to be getting that data used as a collective, as an association and with our partners, to really look at where are the areas we need to intervene, where are the areas we need to make changes to actually drive that forward. So I would say the biggest thing we're doing from this is it's just really pushing us to accelerate and go faster, double down, and ensure that we're doing the very best that we can in our role in the ecosystem.
I wanted to come on to that as well, because obviously, as we've said, that disclosure is great, standardized labeling is great, but ultimately it's up to brands to do that, and it is only the first step. It won't in and of itself get, for example, that level of decarbonisation that you mentioned, and meet other targets on things like waste, sustainable material use, and human rights. So I wanted to get your view on how systems like the coalition can address these challenges with not only disclosure and measurements, but with this action on the ground. So how can that infrastructure be used to help do that?
Super, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of the most critical question, because at the end of the day, measuring and getting data is just the first step. What do you actually do with it is really critical. And I think I'll use the example I said about our target around 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Under that, there's a whole stream of work. You mentioned at the beginning that my role is membership and stakeholder engagement. I'm really fortunate. I've just actually building a new team with a new director who joined 3 weeks ago, and her role is collective action. So we have a team being built around collective action, and really the goal of that is and if I take the greenhouse gas emissions reduction, is how do we take the data we've got and how do we then work collectively with our members? So as part of that, we're building a science-based target program so that we're ensuring that, at the moment, I think about 37% of our corporate members have science-based targets. The goal for us is to work with all of our members to set science-based targets. So it is set an incredible approach. So collectively, what can we do? We can collectively build programs to guide, train, support these members in developing their science-based targets. The other thing we can do collectively in that space is we introduced in last year, and we're just doing the first full analysis, new membership requirements. And in those requirements, we are going to have requirements around setting science-based targets and then making progress on them. And so we can set that. So that's kind of a driver. And then the other thing is, as you said, with all of that data collectively that we're getting, and we work very closely with WRI and Apparel Impact Institute did a report on getting to 45 and utilizing a lot of our data. That's giving us insights now into where in the supply chain can we actually intervene to make changes. So with the data we've got, we can actually look at it and go, if we're going to get to 45, we know that we need to, where are the biggest energy hotspots in the supply chains for our members? And then if that's a group of factories or an area, we can then bring together a number of the members and say, what do we need to do to work towards, renewable energy there, getting off coal? And that's all part of this collective action program that is currently, really accelerating quite fast for us. So I think it's that the role we play is bringing the data to a collective group of people to actually inform where to intervene and what actions to take and what to do to really address some of those big urgent issues that we have. Does that answer your question, or does that, have you?
Of course. And obviously best of luck setting up that team and bedding it in, and hopefully we can touch base in the future.
More than happy to come back and talk to you more about, what we're doing on that. I think there's two big pieces that will be interesting, that piece of work, and we do have a transparency report coming out in June as part of our annual report. Happy to connect with you on that, because that really is the roadmap that we're working on going beyond, in terms of how do we utilize this data to put it in the hands of decision makers. So yeah, that's another area I think would be great.
Great. Well, I'll keep my eyes peeled for that. But Andrew, I think for today's call, we're nearly out of time. So thank you so much for your time this morning.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much. Anytime you want to chat, let me know. I'm more than happy.